Hi, I'm Baldur Brönnimann, and this is the Conducting Coaching Podcast, where we talk about conducting from the inside. Hello everybody here from Madrid. This is Baldur. Welcome back to the Conducting Coaching Podcast, and this week we will talk about a career issue. When I look around in the conducting world, I see a lot of people wanting to do exactly the same thing. Everybody wants to be the next Gustavo Dudamel or the next Klaus Makela. And people want fundamentally to have the same careers as they've seen in other conductors or to do the same repertoire as everybody else. So there's this one market where everybody wants to try and pile into doing the same things over and over again to get noticed in the same way as other people before and just fundamentally repeating patterns they've already seen. And when I talk to conductors who I want to book, asking them what they want to conduct, so many people say the same things, the same sort of works, the same sort of structure of program and so on. And many conductors of all sort of ages really think if they have too clear a profile, if they're known for one specific thing, that they will get pigeonholed and they will never be allowed or never get booked again for something else than what they're known for. And sometimes this is true. Sometimes you do get, you have a name for something and then you get booked for that specific thing. You might be a great youth orchestra trainer, you might be a great wind band conductor, and you have a certain specialty in repertoire and you get booked for that, or at least you make your first steps in this. This is because the market is just much wider than this really small aspect that everybody wants to do, like the Dudamel type of career. But I always think it's much better to get booked than not to get booked. So let's have a look at all these aspects, because this is obviously a question that everybody faces sooner or later in their conducting careers. Now maybe I have to answer this question straight away about getting pigeonholed and so on. Do you really need a profile? Do you really need a niche, a specialization? I think you absolutely do. Remember Leila talking about this narrative that needs to be created. Just have a look as an exercise, at the lists of the agencies around. Have a look, for example, at the IMG as a really long conductors list and so on. How many of those conductors, first of all, do you really know? And how many of them can you sort of identifying as doing something particular? So putting yourself in the chair of a chief executive or maybe a university professor who wants to book a conductor for their student orchestra, how do you know who does a good job with that? Who has something unique and personal to say about a specific type of work or repertoire? Or who would do a great job with making your student orchestra sound amazing and teaching your people lots of really important things about orchestral playing? Or maybe again, you're thinking as a chief executive or an artistic manager, you have to find a conductor for some family projects or for some out-of-town concerts. Why would you book one conductor and not the other? And if you can't give these answers, for some of the people you see, then have a look at yourselves. Because that's where all this process starts. You have to have a long and hard look at yourselves. What your real skills are. And when I say real skills, I mean real skills, because sometimes I look at people who think they're good at one thing, but fundamentally they're good at something else. And sometimes you're not the best judge of that about yourselves. You have to ask other people around you, because it's easy to get the wrong perception. And the important thing when you get booked is not your perception, it's the perception from outside. But there's nothing better than you starting to have a clear look at yourselves and seeing what sets you apart from other people. And also especially what your passions are, because conducting is about showing your passion, taking people with you, inspiring people and so on. So your passions and your skills, that's what you have to look for. Not very long ago, I talked to a young choir conductor who's a great choir conductor. People love him, etc. And he asked me, what do I have to do to get into orchestral conducting? And I said, okay, look, in orchestral conducting, you have to apply for the same things. You will have a lot of competition. Maybe you get invited to certain things through your choir work. Maybe people will give you some out of towns. Maybe they give you a chance. But instead of being one of many orchestral conductors and having a mediocre career, why don't you try and be the best possible choir conductor? Because if you achieve that, there are great jobs around, and there's also a great job satisfaction around, because you can do great repertoire with people who love working with you and so on. And even if you get to that sort of level, you might branch out into some other fields, even orchestral conducting or so, because you're recognized for being a great conductor in your field. You make a name for yourself with something. Now, conducting is super competitive, and I recognize that a lot of the frustrations of people come from the fact that they look much more at what they don't do instead of at what they do. Conducting in the Dudamel and Klaus Merkela sort of world is super subjective. It's not just about what you do, it's also about, your image, what comes with you, like in Gustavo, for example, of course, the whole story, Latin America, El Sistema, and so on. Klaus being a representative of the Nordic conducting schools, standing for something, also representing maybe something that the business aims for, or projecting an image that people look for. These are just things that are out of your control, and they have nothing to do with your musical skills. And is this really the one career option that you're aiming for, or is this the career path that suits you best, where you will get the most satisfaction and also the best career options out of? These are the kind of things you have to ask yourselves. Sometimes when I'm part of these discussions about conductors, in the professional field, people talk about conductors and who you should book, and how names are being made, you talk about different careers and so on, and it sometimes really makes me laugh, because it's so different than what we talk about in the conducting world. We think in different categories than the people who book us, and this is a fact that you just have to live with. And I can just recommend that you try and make a difference in the things that you can influence, and not think for 1 second about the things you can't influence, because you won't change the market around you. So when you have that long, hard look at yourselves, then you see the skills. For example, maybe you're good at persuading people. So get an orchestra together, make people play for you, get a gig somewhere, convince people to go with you. Or maybe you're really good looking, so make sure your face is on Instagram, play your beauty cards. Hey, this is all good, it's conducting, it's show business. Or maybe you're a great academic, so you dig out something that has never been done before, or you do some unique research and make this into a concert. And if you're not great at the showbiz aspect, then there are plenty of other jobs around, university jobs, and really good jobs that will give you much better satisfaction, much greater pleasure than trying something that's not really made for you, or you're not really made for it. Then the next aspect you have to look at is you have to see if there's a real market out there for what you want to do. So for example, if you're conducting a top-class balalaika orchestra in Belarus, you might not necessarily get invited to conduct in Bayreuth, but there will be some other next steps that you can take. And here you have to think strategically, because that's what agents normally do. They think your career through in certain steps, so that at certain stages you will have to take certain steps. And with every step you take in your career, you think about what's coming next and what's coming after that. It's the same with, football players, for example, soccer players here. The agents plan their careers in similar ways, like it's not the next contract that counts, but the contract that comes after the next contract. So it's this kind of strategic thinking that you will have to do by yourselves if you don't have an agent. But I'll repeat this here because it's so important. Fundamentally, your niche is about your passion. It's maybe even more about your passion than about your skill, because you have to be the force that drives a message home. You have to be the force that makes things work. And this will come from your inner desire. When I was young, I did a lot of stupid things. I think it's important to try out many different the musical settings, like repertoire, get yourself in many different situations, but you will also do things that make no sense, and from these you will learn the most. I've seen artists or sometimes also managers making terrible mistakes. I remember in my generation there was a young conductor who won a very important competition. He got a big agency, and it had a very good career. But then they booked him on a world tour with a heavy metal band, which had like, I don't know, 40, 50 concerts. And, the agency and him, they made a lot of money. But after he was really known for that, and they couldn't sell him for anything else. And so the agency dropped him. And I think that's just a terrible story, because it's just very bad strategy. But it's the reality, and it's in your own hands to take better decisions. Now, one last thing I might add here is don't just sit at home and wait until the phone rings. Doesn't matter how old you are or in which stage of your career you are. You have to go out there and be part of the mix, because you get information. You will find out how the market works, what people are looking for, how they see you. You will sort of, the more information you have, the better you can operate with that. I can firmly say that in many parts of the world, or many parts of the world that I know, the classical music business is changing. It's opening up in many interesting sort of branches and many interesting aspects, new perspectives and so on. And you're part of that, because as conductors, you make things work. You bring in ideas, you bring in inspiration. And that's where your skill and your creativity are so important. So make sure you use all the room for action you have. Because sometimes it feels like, the world is against me, nobody books me, nobody recognizes me, I missed opportunities, I don't know how to do certain things. But you have a certain field of action, and you have to make sure that you use that. So throw yourselves not just into your scores, but create projects, bring ideas, bring your own perspective. You have to be active in your career, not passive. And when you use this field of action that you have, then you have a much bigger chance to be happy, to be more satisfied with your career, and to be a force and a living part of the music scene around you. Thanks for listening. To send us your comments or suggestions, please write us a message on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the conducting coaching news and events.